Yeah, sure, not a problem. So, jazz blues, right? Let me open up the chart here, Bhagya, just to make sure that I'm on the right track.
আর স্যার এইরকম যদি আরো কোনো অ্যারেঞ্জমেন্ট বা অল্টারনেটিভস থাকে কর্ড প্রোগ্রেশনে, যেমন এটা ধরুন একটা স্ট্রাকচার, তাহলে স্যার আমাকে একটু পাঠিয়ে দেবেন। মানে
Yeah, so see, mane jazz blues
স্যার
है.
এই পারমুটেশন কম্বিনেশন হবে ব্যাস।
Yeah, exactly. So like if you know one, তাহলে বাকিগুলো like it's really
আমি
going to
নিজেই
be
বানিয়ে নিতে পারবো।
correct. মানে with all of the reharmonizations that we are talking about, ওই reharmonization গুলো নিয়ে আর কি বানিয়ে নিতে পারবেন. So
আর
we
স্যার
were
আমি
doing it in
নিজে,
G, right? Just
হ্যাঁ,
yeah. হ্যাঁ বলুন.
আর স্যার আমি নিজের কম্পোজিশনে স্যার এরকম স্ট্রাকচার ইউজ করতে পারবো তো?
No, of course you can. Yeah, mane, these are not like patented or anything. Like
বুঝতে
it,
পেরেছি, হ্যাঁ।
mane, if you're choosing a melody and then you're like blatantly copying that, then that is of course going to be an infringement
বুঝতে
of some
পেরেছি।
sort. But then like even I have my own tunes which are like based on jazz blues. There's this one tune called Tikka Blues. Then there's this other one called Blue Ride. Blue Ride is it's not based on jazz blues, but then it's based on the blues like 12-bar blues form, right?
আচ্ছা,
Then Oita Chara, I have another one which is called like Is That It? That is also based on a 12-bar form, but not exactly jazz blues. But it's got dominant movements only in it. But
স্যার
anyway,
আমি
tell me.
আমি স্যার যেমন একটা জিনিস বলছি আপনাকে, ধরুন আমি I can do stuff like this.
No, no, of course, yeah, of course you can. See, the thing is, these are things that you're learning as material, right? Mane, the blues form is like a very common form that has been used in a specific era of music altogether. So, this doesn't mean that when you are trying to create music, you have to follow exactly that, right? I know. So, you can always add your own flavor to that. That is
মানে
not an issue.
স্ট্রাকচারটা রাখতে হবে, তারপরে আমি
Yeah, you can play with the structure also. As an artist, you will have your own flavor to it. Now, if you feel as an artist that I want to try adding an extra bar in one cycle, that's also fine. There are people who do that. There are blues players, like especially if you're talking about traditional blues players. Kichu Kichu Shoma, you will see that in the moment they're sort of telling the band that there is going to be an extra bar. Maybe like they'll stay on the four chord for an extra bar just because whatever they're singing requires that for them.
বুঝতে পেরেছি।
Like Bob Dylan, even though like he's not a blues musician, Bob Dylan had a habit of doing that. Where like let's say he will stay on a specific chord for a little longer, even though in the original like arrangement it was not even the thing. Some may call it what's the word for it, like lack of discipline, and some may just call it artistry. That's I guess more of like a personal. Yeah. For me, it could be either. To be very honest, because it really just depends on the musician you're talking about. If you're talking about someone like Louis Armstrong, who was clearly a very educated musician in the sense when he really knew what he was doing. If he did that, I would probably think, yeah, that's an artistic choice. If someone like Dylan did that, who and like Dylan, I consider him to be more of a poet, even though he has a lot of great songs and he is very influential. But I honestly, as a musician, I consider him to be more of a poet than an actual musician per se, right? So when we consider that, if he does that, then obviously like I would maybe call it either lack of discipline or just like lack of proficiency altogether. But yeah, like I wouldn't look at that in a negative way per se. So similarly, you can also use that same idea in your compositions. It really does not mean that just because a form is written in 12 bars, you have to do exactly that. You can completely mess around with it. Yeah. Cool. So we were doing it in G. Now jazz blues in G. Prothome, I'm going to play the basic chord structure for you. Right. So we have G7 going to C7, and I'm using like just like usual tensions for it, right? Then back to G7. Then we have a 2-5 to C7. So D minor 7 to G7, going to C7. Then we have C sharp diminished 7th, and then back to G7. Then we have a 2-5 to A minor, and then D7, then a 1, 6, 2, and 5. Going back to the 1 chord again. Right. So now, when we are talking about reharmonizations, there are of course a lot of things that we can do. One of the first things we can look into are the sub 5s. Okay. So easiest way to look at the sub 5 is just look at the tritone. ঠিক আছে, G এর থেকে tritone এটা হচ্ছে, that's your, you can look at it as a D flat dominant, right? Because this G dominance, when a tritone substitution is basically whatever dominant chord you're trying to use, you are substituting that with a dominant chord that is built a tritone above that, which is why it's also known as tritone substitution sometimes, right? So in order to go to that C7, we were doing D minor 7 to G7th, right? So we can do D minor 7th to D flat 7 with 9, or just normal 7 also you can do, and then land on the C chord. So if I play the, tell me. No, diminished का dominant chord नहीं है. We did a tritone substitution. माने G7 ते जाएगा, we used a D flat 7. हाँ, traditionally now there are ways of using diminished chords as well, but that is like, that usually happens when you're looking more towards the upper structures, or like when you're looking, like when you're actually working with diminished scales. তখন হচ্ছে you figure out different ways of sort of using different kinds of dominant chords, or like different kinds of diminished 7th chords to substitute for that. But for now, let's just like stick to the sub 5s as dominant chords only, right? When we look into the upper structures, some of that will automatically come out. Yes, cool. So now if I play till here, till the C7, it sounds like this: 1, 4, 1, 2, sub 5 to 4, right? So instead of that, I did right. So this adds a different flavor again to that. Then we have C sharp diminished 7. Now, since it's a diminished 7th chord, right? Diminished 7th chords are symmetric. So you have 4 notes in this particular diminished 7th chords, and these are all minor thirds apart. So you can really just think of this shape. And play it minor thirds apart, right? You can go down. If you go down, you get B flat. Then you have C sharp here again. Minor third up from that, E. Minor third up from that, G. So that means in order to substitute this, if you want to substitute this, you already have 3 other substitutions. You have B flat 7. Now, obviously, this B flat 7 is a little further away, so you can use it here. Or you can use a G diminished 7th here as well, right? Because that was also available. And then you can use E diminished 7th as well. And all of these are really inversions of each other. So, instead of playing that C sharp diminished, I can play 2 chords. I can play 2 beats of C sharp diminished, and then 2 beats of B flat diminished, and then go back to the G13, right? So let me play till there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Right. Then we go to the other 2-5, which is B minor 7 to E, going to A minor 7. Now here, flat 9. Yeah, I used the E7 flat 9. Right. Yeah, I can use sharp 9 also. if there's a flat 9 available, sharp 9 is always available for the most part, unless it's very specific things. But yeah, so the reason I can automatically think and understand that it's available is because I am resolving to a minor 7 chord over there, right? Usually when you're resolving to a minor chord, we use altered dominants, right?
আচ্ছা
So I can even sort of try using a dominant, like a dominant 7 sharp 9 with a flat 13 as well. So ekhantate from C, the flat 13 will be C right here. So from E, the flat 13 will be C right here, right? So that will be the voicing. So I can use that also. And then go to A minor 9 because it's voice leading very nicely
voice
here,
leading.
right? And then for the D7 also, technically since it's going to a dominant chord, I can use a normal dominant and non-altered dominant, but I feel the sound of that dominant flat 9 with a 13 sounds pretty nice, right? So if I do that voice leading going on here, goes to so this is like the last 4 bars, the last 2 bars, the turnaround. So 1, 2. So here also again, like I'm using a dominant 7th sharp 9 with the 5 on top. Then A minor 9 top voice, and then D dominant 7 flat 9 with 13. Going back to the 1 chord. Right. So these are some pretty nice reharmonization like options that you have. Even B minor 7, instead of just doing that, you can play this version of a B minor 9. Right? And then that. So that's the E dominant 7 sharp 9 with flat 13. Right? So, right. Some pretty nice melodic stuff, like very Joe Pass-ish kind of thing. And honestly, like Joe Pass is one of my biggest influences. So whenever I listen to solo guitar, this is like a very common thing for me to do, where I get into his thing, you know. Like even if I'm going around the blues just like that, 1 and 2 and 3 and now here you might have noticed that I actually skipped the B minor 7 chord. That is also some
পুরোটাই আমার মানে চোখের মধ্যে মানে it was like a ঘুরছিল স্যার বুঝতেই পারছি
but I skipped the B minor 7.
মেলোডিটা ফলো করতে পেরেছি
Yeah, I skipped the B minor 7. So rather than like after the instead of doing the, I just did that, right? And that's because this is another Joe Pass idea only that I'm like really just blatantly stealing here. That is, in one of these masterclasses slash interviews, he had mentioned J 251. When we are talking about 251, this is a 251 basically. Not a 25. It is a 251 actually, because you're going from B minor 7 to E7 to an A minor 7. So it's not a traditional minor 251, but then it is a 251 because A is the one when we compare it to B minor and E7, right? So in a 251, you really do not need to think of it as a 2-5. You can really just think of it as a 5-1, because the 5 is the more prominent chord in there. The 5 is more prominent in the harmony, if that's making sense, right?
So
Yeah,
that is the dominant which is leading to the one.
correct, correct. That is exactly the dominant which is leading to. So even when he was talking about the modal approach of it, like as in like when we're talking about chord scales, right? The B minor 7, the 2 minor will think of, we are basically going to be thinking of Dorian as like a traditional thought process. So B Dorian. Then for E7 we're thinking E Mixolydian. And then since we're landing on A minor over here, we're gonna think of A Dorian, because from the perspective of G, A is going to be Dorian over here, right? Because it's a 2 minor again. But then since we are concentrating on the 2-5, we are thinking of B Dorian to E7. So if I just play those scales, you can definitely hear the sound of that, right? But then that sounds like very, I don't know, I don't like the sound of just being a random scale being played. So even if I play the arpeggios, I know. So you could hear the sound of that, right?
The dominant sound
Yeah,
main get what's
correct. Exactly. So I think that's a lot of options that we have spoken about. Now, if you really want to get deeper into it, I would say rather than looking into more options, if you just look into the upper structures of all of these options we spoke about.
আমার মানে স্যার আমি একটা
Yeah.
জিনিস রিয়েলাইজ করছি, আপনি আপার স্ট্রাকচার করে খেলছেন এবং তার সাথে যে কিছু কিছু ভেরিয়েশনস নিচ্ছেন, আমি ওগুলো ধরুন নানান নাম দিয়ে এক একটা কর্ড ভাবতে পারি, বাট আমি এটাও ভাবতে পারি যে আপনি যে কর্ড শেপটা গ্রিপটা ধরছেন তার সাথে ইউ আর জাস্ট ভিজুয়ালাইজিং দ্য স্কেল।
কারেক্ট, কারেক্ট। মানে আমি ব্যাপারটা আরো সিম্পলিফাই করে দিচ্ছি। এক্স্যাক্টলি, আমি ব্যাপারটাকে আরো সিম্পলিফাই করছি আমার জন্য,
And
রাইট?
you're searching for that melody.
এক্স্যাক্টলি,
Accordingly, you are taking the scale notes also.
correct,
The scale notes.
correct. Now, like there are other approaches also. There's like the West Montgomery block chord approach. You have the Barry Harris like diminished scale approach. Like sorry, the dominant diminished scale approaches and all of that. But oigulo, man, I will get into it in time, like with time. Right now, I don't want to get into all of that yet. I want you to really sort of like focus on these things and then extract more ideas from this. Karan, this itself will have some of those ideas. So when you actually are very comfortable moving around the fretboard with these ideas, তখন if I introduce you to the Barry Harris methods and the West Montgomery block chord methods, etc., like diminished scale approaches and all of that, তখন all of those approaches will become a little easier for you, just because you are already able to visualize the fretboard. Because for those things, you really need to visualize these things pretty well, right?
আর স্যার এটা স্যার পুরো রেকর্ড করেছেন?
Whole thing is recorded. Yeah.